I'm Mark Harcourt. I'm a professor in Human Resource Management at the Waikato Management School, and I've been here 17 years, and prior to that I was at Victoria University in Wellington, and prior to that I was educated in Canada. Well, as someone from an industrial relations background, I was very much interested in the essentials of the employment relationship and its legal aspects, as well as its practical aspects in the real world. I think that the breadth of studying this topic was very attractive to me. So the very fact that it involved the intersection of economics, law, sociology, psychology, and a number of other areas all coming together made it very appealing to me. Well, one of the things that I've been interested in recently is the implications of behavioral economics and our understanding of how the brain works and the human behavior associated with that, and what are the implications of that for employment law. One particular issue that really I find very relevant, and it's this whole notion of defaults and how defaults affect how people think and how they behave. And so the employment relationship is full of defaults, and what's written on paper and agreed mutually between the parties, especially when there's only one employee and one employer, is often far less important than all the default terms that fall into place because of the law and how the law works. So default is what happens when you don't make a decision. And so what the default is set at has a powerful impact on what actually happens. I'll give you a real-life example. If you make organ donation the default, if people don't choose to be organ donors, then evidence indicates that 90+% of the population will donate their organs. But if you do the opposite, you'll make about 80% of the population not donate their organs. Okay, well, one of those defaults is the management's right to manage, or managerial prerogative, as it's called. And this basically says that if the employment contract is silent, management gets to decide that whatever terms and conditions were not in the contract. Okay? So basically the power defaults to management to decide that. All right? So a lot of economists traditionally would have argued that that particular default was simply optimal, that the managerial prerogative and the authority relations inherent to the employment contract are chosen because they are efficient, right? And that the default is meaningless, that they assume that if there was something that was more efficient, that would be chosen instead. But my argument is that setting the default has powerful effects on what people end up choosing. And that's for three basic reasons. Number one, because of inertia. People simply don't like change. They'll stick with whatever the status quo is. And choosing is cognitively demanding. And if you make a mistake, it can be embarrassing, humiliating, or in other ways negative. A second reason could be the power of norms. Defaults tend to be understood as norms. And so if they think the default is B, they will go with B because they think it's the right thing to do. That's what most people have chosen already. And a third is loss aversion. So what tends to happen is the default becomes a reference point for determining gains and losses. And losses are usually seen as twice as significant as gains. So if I move away from that default to option A, right, it's seen as a loss. Right? And it's purely because B has been set as the reference point against which gains and losses are determined. So any move away from that is seen as a loss. And if losses are psychically twice as heavy as gains, people will stay with the default unless the gains look fabulous, twice as good. All right? That means that the default effects of many aspects of the employment relationship are very strong in people's minds and have a big impact on their behavior. So the very fact that defaulted to a non-union status in their employment relationship typically means they'll stick with that unless there's strong forces to overcome that inertia, that norm effect, and the loss aversion. All right?
Yeah.
And the same applies to this managerial prerogative. The authority relations within the employment relationship are very strong. Because the employment institutions that we have relied on and which have evolved gradually over time are still based on authority, where one party, the employer, is in charge and gives the orders and unilaterally decides the terms and conditions, and the other party just basically accepts whatever they're told. And there's not a hell of a lot you can do about that. That's what we are still, I think, struggling with that, because more and more aspects of work involve collegial elements to them, cooperative elements to them. The closer we go to the creative, modern, innovation-based economy, the more that just doesn't work. You can't use authority relations to make people creative. Using pay, trying to attach it to various different outcomes has been something that's become a lot more common in some quarters. But there's a lot of problems with using pay for performance models, what's called market governance, because what's not rewarded tends to not be done, and not be done very well. The other main way that companies try and influence people's behavior is through influencing their values, their thinking, their thoughts, their ideas about what's right and appropriate and so on. That value alignment with the goals of the employer could come from many sources. It could come from things as diverse as gender roles, the educational process, the induction process, but sometimes the value alignment comes from other things. Sometimes it's a very deliberate focus of what the organization tries to do through benevolence. So the employees don't come with value alignment. The organization has to work hard to create it. Well, my view has long been that many of the greatest insights come from reading in other disciplines and then understanding that there may be implications for a different discipline. Maybe that's less original than sitting in, at home and developing the theory of E equals MC squared. But nevertheless, I think that's sort of the next layer of originality, where you recognize that understanding of behavior in one area can apply to another. And I think there's some exciting things going on that really need to be brought over into other disciplines.